Okay, so we're moving on to this uh, West, the wild, sometimes called the Wild West, in the late 1800s. I talked a little bit in our class discussion earlier about Native Americans being considered nations to people who are Native Americans. It's not just one large tribe of Native Americans. That each tribe has its own culture and its own beliefs and its own history. Kind of like England has a different history than uh, Australia or France or Spain or Brazil. All have different histories. So the Native Americans tribes view themselves as having completely separate histories either, not just one giant Native American tribe. So, and we can see from this map, each tribe has its own, or each nation has its own history. And I've been fortunate to sit in on Native American graduate school classes, 3-hour classes, with those spending their entire research in Native American history. So I've been fortunate to have met many people from different tribes and learned quite a bit in graduate school. Um, for one semester, I got to sit in on some classes and got to hear the great self-perspective of different tribes, but also the fierce differences in different tribes. And the Navajo was characteristic of farming, and they had a long history themselves. Remember, many Native Americans had died over decades or even centuries to do with disease, especially, which is very much undercovered. Like in the book Plagues and People, up to 80 to 85% of Native Americans had died from things such as smallpox and the lack of immunity when they were exposed to people from other countries, um, as well as battles between tribes and battles with settlers or military. Um, but over 80% was from disease. So many of the tribes had some of their lowest tribal size by the late 1800s, but they were still very fierce in their independence. So you can see here the Navajo is a Southwest tribe, and I think we're going to look at their each culture of each tribe, like the graduate schools in Native American history like to cover, and in each cultural difference and religious differences. So you see a lot of different artwork for the Navajo, but really what the Navajo were known for was not riding. No, they were not nomadic at all. Like they didn't ride around from area to area. They loved to farm or agriculture, and they were known for herding goats and sheep and growing corn and beans and squash, and they were known for weaving and weaving blankets, which I'll show you some of that. So yeah, weaving. So weaving and agriculture. So when you describe the Navajo, they're known for agriculture, farming, weaving, um, ranching, and they would wear blankets as artistic expression. The Navajo loved art, and not just for warmth with blankets, but as an artistic expression. Um, see more of things that they design. They also had a fierce love of nature, and all right, so and they were very good at weaving. They would trade. They would trade with friendly settlers, um, but sometimes, like I said, that trading led to catching disease through lack of immunity sometimes. But they would trade with other tribes, and they would and trade with settlers. Okay, so let's see. So the religion, and religion is one thing that historians look at of different groups. And the religion included deities and symbols of worship for plants and animals and spiders and nature. Moccasins or shoe type items that they made themselves. So, so the Navajo actually did really well. There's a lot of Navajo around still today. So today, the tribal 150,000 still live in Arizona, and 100,000 live in New Mexico. So that's a total of 360,000 um, enrolled tribal members. And there's no way to know how many may have left the reservation or did not keep up on their membership as generations went by. And of course, many may have intermarried with other groups, intermarried with people who weren't Navajo, and there's no records of that. But just the tribal membership alone um, is quite high today. Probably even more than there was in the late 1800s. Um, okay. Much later, and we're not going to cover this, I'm going to quickly mention this. Much later, in the 1900s, the Navajo actually were greatly important in helping the United States win World War II, and they were called the Navajo Code Breakers. But I won't get. We'll get into that again in World War II section, which is well after later in this class, after the midterm. This looks like more modern Navajo. Well, around plants and agriculture, they're still very much interested in agriculture. And in having all kinds of the reservations or living in areas near the reservations or even in the cities that and then go and have uh, either actively are involved in agriculture or go to ceremonies to remember their heritage. So finally we see here, right, that the geographical area of not just the Navajo back in the late 1800s during the time of the West, but also now. Though many have moved away from there, you still have large amounts of Navajo living in that area. So that's the culture of the Navajo.